So at the beginning of the summer, I was lucky enough to be in Salem, Massachusetts for a rabbinic convention. There was one night where we were all on our own for dinner, and a small group of us decided to go for Mexican. Go figure, Salem, Massachusetts. As we walked to the restaurant, I happened to look down and find a wallet right in front of me on the sidewalk. Of course, I picked it up, and we all gathered around anxious to find out what we could discover about the owner. We found an ID, some money, a few gift cards, and suddenly we were Facebook stalking this person. And a few Facebook posts later, instant messages, we contacted her, set up a meetup at the restaurant, and returned her wallet. To say that she was grateful would be an understatement. But to us, as a group of rabbis, it was all in a day's work, a mitzvah. Our experience reminded me of a series called My Unsung Hero, which airs as a part of the Hidden Brain program on NPR. They are short stories like mine, 2 to 3 minute vignettes, but generally from the other perspective, where one person reached out to help another in a time of need. For Susan Haas, a single mom, it was receiving a haircut and color when she didn't have the funds from a generous stylist as she was preparing for both a job interview and a court date for custody of her son. And she got the job and the custody. And for Daniel Willingham, it was an employee at the passport office in Washington, D.C., who was willing to wait for him long after hours so he can get an emergency passport in order to get to his daughter's bedside while she was in the ICU at a Canadian hospital. And for Bill Price, his unsung hero experience dated back over 50 years, when he was just 15 years old. At the end of a youth group type program, when everyone was gathering around to say goodbye, he was standing alone. And suddenly a group of kids turned to him and invited him in. That one act of welcome transformed his life. Not just what they did in that moment, and that was hugely significant, but it taught him that he could do that for anyone. As Mary Louise Kelly, co-host of All Things Considered on NPR, told her unsung hero story, she commented, "There are so many stories of villainy in the world, of greediness and corruption and evil, that to come across the most simple stories of kind people, good people, willing to go out of their way to do a kind turn for a stranger, it's good to remember that." To be clear, my rabbinic colleagues and I certainly did not think of ourselves as heroes. And I'm not telling you our story to pat ourselves on the back or toot our own horns for something that was simply the right thing to do. But I will say, from our perspective, it felt good to help someone, a stranger at that. It felt good to go out of our way just a little bit and make a difference for her in what had to have been a stressful situation. The gratitude that you hear from those who were helped on My Unsung Hero series is unparalleled. Small acts have tremendous impact, and it does remind me how easy it is to do a mitzvah, to help a stranger, to extend ourselves outside of our inner circle and our ordinary routine. In Judaism, a mitzvah is a commandment, as in the 10 Commandments or the 613 Commandments. It's only in the vernacular where mitzvah has become known as a good deed, like helping someone across the street, holding the door for the next person, or a random act of kindness paying forward from one person to the next. So, are these really mitzvot, commandments? I would suggest that they are. As we begin the book of Deuteronomy this week, it is the beginning of Moses' farewell address to the people Israel as they stand at the border of the Promised Land. There is something beautiful and hopeful about it, knowing that they are about to cross over to their final destination. But it is also intimidating and anxiety-producing standing there with an uncertain future. The book begins, Ele hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel. It's pretty benign. There are phrases like this throughout the entirety of Torah. But there's something a little off, a little different. It turns out this is the first time the phrase Kol Yisrael is used, though it will be repeated another 10 times in the book of Deuteronomy. Kol Yisrael means all of Israel. Before, it was Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. You might say, that's just a matter of syntax. All of Israel versus the children of Israel. But I believe that it's more than that. It's actually a statement of growth. The people are no longer children. They have matured into adults, and that means they must be responsible. They must make choices that have consequences. They must take care of one another, all themes that are reflected throughout Deuteronomy. And the final book of the Torah establishes the Israelite society with a representative government, where each person is responsible to the next, as it reminds us time and time again to care for the vulnerable and the needy, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, reinforcing that change from Bnei Yisrael to Kol Yisrael. And to take it one step further, there's a Talmudic saying with the same phrase, Kol Yisrael aravim ze lezeh. All Jews, and I would extend this to all human beings, are responsible for one another. It's not far-fetched, all human beings. Each one of us was made in God's image. We are all a reflection of the divine, and therefore all connected, all accountable to and for each other. At the end of the day, this is what it means to be an adult, and this is what it means to perform a mitzvah. I keep thinking about Julie Cadwallader-Staub's unsung hero. Julie had decided to go to Boston to visit a friend shortly after her husband had passed away. This was long before GPS and cell phones, and he had always been the navigator. She had good directions to get there and figured she would just follow them backwards to get home. But Julie quickly became turned around with no idea where she was, and she began to panic and finally found a neighborhood gas station where she asked the attendant for directions. But he couldn't help her, and of course, she didn't have a map. The unsung hero was the woman at the next pump. It's too complicated to explain, she said. Just follow me, and I'll lead you there. And the last thing she saw was the woman's hand out the window waving and pointing to the freeway entrance, and Julie was waving back and thanking her with every ounce of her being as she turned to the on-ramp and headed home. Maybe it's silly, but I get shivers every time I hear her story. I've listened to it several times, and maybe it's because I can imagine myself in that very situation, or maybe it's just because the woman was so nice. And it's hard to imagine people doing things like that these days. I wouldn't ordinarily tell you what to talk about at the Oneg, but maybe tonight I can suggest that you share some stories of folks who went above and beyond for you. Someone who did a mitzvah with you in mind. Who is your unsung hero? Who helped you when you least expected it? Perhaps by sharing these stories, we might inspire others to become an unsung hero too. I hope so. Shabbat Shalom.